Good morning. My name is Trey George. Welcome to Municon Day 3. I'm going to be your moderator today for Emma Trewhitt with the Washington Department of Ecology and her talk on the history of structural stormwater controls. And with that, I'd like to say, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll address them at the end of Emma's presentation. And Emma, if you want to take it.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Like you said, my name is Emma Trewhitt. I am one of the municipal stormwater permit writers with the Department of Ecology. And retrofits have been on everybody's mind a lot lately. So figured we'd give a little history of our current structural stormwater controls program. So before we dive into that, just a very quick kind of reminder. This is just one component of our overall MS4 permits. These are programmatic permits, and they are designed to kind of take a comprehensive approach to stormwater management. This screen is skipping a bit ahead in the history department, but this is how our permits are currently structured. Just to kind of illustrate, this is just, one of many different components in the permittees overall program. And I will also mention that this structural stormwater controls requirement is only a phase 1 component currently. So this only applies to phase 1 permits. So I promise I'm not just going to read off my slides for this whole presentation, but I just really wanted to make sure to emphasize what the overall goals of this program are. It just really gives context to every decision and change that we have made to the program over the years. So really, the overall goal is to retrofit existing developed areas and promote planning and prioritization of projects to reduce impacts to watershed hydrology and pollutant discharges from the MS4. Qualifying projects for this are going to reduce or prevent negative water quality impacts from MS4s and stormwater impacts that are inadequately controlled by other permit requirements. So really, this is kind of like the above and beyond permit requirement, right? This is trying to get at things that the other areas of the permit are not fully addressing. Okay, so on to the history portion of this, at least for the most part. My goal today is just to give you some insight to how this program's progressed over the years, and also to give you some comparison to just how far this requirement has come compared to just what is simply written in the CFR. This information is also a great setup and will give you the rationale and reasoning for the talk that is right after mine in this track, where Amy Navikas-Brash with Osborne Consulting is going to be talking about our current SSC science synthesis project. So this is kind of a prelude into that. So if I had to fit all of the history into one kind of Cliff Notes-esque slide, this would be it. So this is just kind of representing the entire time range that I'll be covering, which, as you can see, is spanning kind of almost 30 years from beginning to end. So starting at the very beginning here, Ecology combined federal requirements of the Clean Water Act with the state requirements of the Washington State Water Pollution Control Act to initiate a combined stormwater NPDES and state waste discharge permit in 1995. So those 1995 permits were just phase 1 permits. And so those were issued to municipalities serving populations over 250,000 in unincorporated counties, and then in medium populations over 100,000 in incorporated cities. So kind of just the most populated areas of the state. So those first phase 1 permits in Washington were issued on a watershed basis, which is a little different than how they're issued now. And the original thinking with that was to try and promote coordination among different municipalities. So those 95 permits did have a retrofit requirement wrapped into the controlling runoff section. In later permits, that controlling runoff section kind of changed a little bit to be more exclusively for new and redevelopment standards. The permits in the 95 permits use the language appropriate treatment and source control measures to reduce pollutants and runoff from existing commercial and residential areas. This is expanded a bit upon in a clarification of permit conditions document, which just basically says that this requirement has the expectation that stormwater management plans include a plan and a schedule for implementing structural and non-structural treatment and source control measures, including retrofitting for the highest priority developed areas. So these 95 permits also included a program to include water quality management considerations into flood management projects, including a schedule for retrofitting existing projects to the extent practicable. And so both those kind of really just stem directly from the CFR, which is kind of highlighted in that nice CFR text over on the right side of the screen. So then moving forward to when the permits were next issued, Ecology made a few changes. So first of all, the requirement, the SSC requirement was pulled into its own section titled Structural Stormwater Controls for the first time. And I guess I don't think I've explicitly said this, but SSC stands for Structural Stormwater Controls. So I kind of use those interchangeably throughout this talk. And so with that, in addition to that, I guess we also outlined some basic qualifying project types to be a little more specific, and clarified a bit more that projects should be documented in their annual reports. So this diagram is just kind of showing basically out with the old and with the new, with, you know, the center being the fact that retrofit requirements were required in both permits still. So that 2007 permit was then appealed and went before the Pollution Control Hearing Board, or PCHB. There was a lot of things involved in that appeal, not just SSCs, but that's what we're focusing on here today. That appeal and subsequent ruling in 2008 was really kind of a defining moment in the direction of the SSC requirement. It was kind of the first domino that was knocked down in a series of events that kind of leads us to where we are today. Long story short, the ruling concluded that as the requirement was written in the 2007 permit, the SSC requirement constituted impermissible self-regulation. And it said it did that by not setting an expectation of a level of effort for implementing these retrofits. So that really got the ball rolling with a lot of things, and really got Ecology thinking about how we could effectively set a level of effort. That PCHB ruling, along with listening sessions and informal comments from permittees, led to a lot of changes going into the 2013 permits. We basically became a lot more specific in the information that we were asking for about each project type, and also added a new appendix to the permit, which I will talk about in a little bit too. So this chart, before I get into the appendix, just kind of outlines the differences between how project types were categorized and referenced in the 2007 permits, and kind of the more clarity that we provided in the 2013 permits. I'll also make a note that each one of those listed project types in the 2013 had were defined more in further detail whereas the listed projects in the 2007 permit were not. So I mentioned there was a whole new appendix added for these 2013 permits. That new Appendix 11 reporting format was really kind of a big change, and it had a couple of primary goals. So first, we were looking for a way to compare water quality and hydrological benefits of projects across different municipalities. And then we were looking for a way to use that metric to quantify those benefits. And remember, this is all in the context of trying to eventually create a defined level of effort as the PCHB directed us to. So with all of the different project types and different applications of those projects, different land use types, all these things, it really ended up basically us trying to figure out an equitable way to compare apples to jump ropes to hummingbirds. I'm not going to dive super deep into how each benefit was calculated, but in simplified terms, the water quality benefit for a project was calculating using a specific TSS reduction calculation method. The hydro benefit calculations were based on our standard flow control requirements and the low impact development performance standards. And in general, then Ecology intended the retrofit incentive to provide more points for projects that achieved higher standards of hydrologic or water quality benefits, and for projects that occurred in degraded areas. So all of that information was leading us up to the 2019 kind of permit reissuance cycle. And so as you saw, that was a lot of information being reported to Ecology, especially compared to the previous permit cycle. We used that information from the Appendix 11 submittals, most notably the calculated water quality and hydro benefit and the incentive points from the permittees, as well as SFAP, which is our Stormwater Financial Assistance Program, kind of grants program. We used project details from that to basically run a series of simulations to develop an estimate total for what we are now calling SSC program points for the projects in the list that permittees had provided to us. So based on this, the SSC program points per jurisdiction ranged from on the low end about 311 points to on the high end about 2,400 points. So those numbers and information were used as a basis for kind of a preliminary draft SSC package that we released in October of 2017. We released this as a preliminary draft to ask for public review. And that initial draft proposed a 1,300 point level to be achieved. So following the release of that preliminary draft, the permittees collaborated to basically give us a more refined data set for Ecology's use in assessing those past SSC project outcomes. So using the newly processed calculation method, this information led to the revision of the minimum level of effort to be modified to what is currently in the permits, which is a level of 300 points. So this is what we are currently using for reporting and calculating SSC points. Don't worry about trying to read this all here. It is conveniently located in Appendix 12 of that Phase 1 permit that I know that everybody just carries around in their back pocket. The SSC program point multipliers, which is on the far right column of the far right graphic stems from those previous retrofit incentive points. So as you can see, many of them are based off of kind of an equivalent area calculation. Ecology based that equivalent area calculation on a scale that compares the amount of runoff treatment or hydrologic control achieved through the proposed project to the amount achieved if you were to design that project to meet our new and redevelopment criteria for the area draining to that new BMP. So fairly similar to kind of how things were being calculated before. I also just want to take a second to talk about some of the conditions of that 300-point level of effort. So first, we wanted to acknowledge that this is the first time that we are specifically requiring a level of effort, and that prioritized and planned projects have the potential to take many years to be implemented, right? There's a lot of planning and internal government process that goes into some of these projects. So because of this, we are allowing up to 225 of those points to be for projects that are just in the design or construction phase. And then a minimum of 75 points, though, must be from completed projects or activities. I'll also note that points from completed projects or activities can be substituted for the design and construction points, but it doesn't work vice versa. Of course, we would, encourage more projects in the ground, but we just wanted to give a little bit of flexibility this time around. Also, you'll notice just in the notes, we added kind of some additional multiplying factors for based on different priorities. One being if a project is in an approved ecology basin plan, if it was a part of the watershed scale stormwater plans that the phase ones did in the 2013 permits, or a TMDL plan. We also wanted to give a multiplier to completed capital projects completed in the MS4 that occur in overburdened communities as well. So as you can see, that 2008 PCHB ruling really did kind of have like a cascading effect. And so that, along with the listening sessions and other informal comments, just really led to a lot of those changes in the 2013 permits. I already talked about the modified Appendix 11 and our newly introduced level of effort, but just a few other changes that we made going into the 2019 permits. We just refined and clarified some more of those project types, and also provided more guidance on what projects would not qualify. So, we gave guidance on things that specifically were going to get you points, but we got a lot of comments and questions about projects that basically don't have a relationship to the MS4, or for some other reason are just not within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish with this permit program. So unsurprisingly, with the issuance of that permit, we received a lot of comments on really both ends of the spectrum about that level of effort. We feel really confident in our rationale and the system that we came up with. However, we do have to acknowledge a couple of things. The first one is that there can be multiple paths to success with where we're trying to get with the goals of this permit program, right? And then we also have to acknowledge that there's a very real part of how we came up with the system that is based on best professional judgment. And it's really expected that we be critiqued on policies that involve permittees spending significant amounts of money. That's very fair. So because of this, during that reissuance process, we committed to having kind of a two-part project and stakeholder discussion. The first of which is that SSC science synthesis project that I mentioned that Amy will be talking about right after this. So the goal of that currently ongoing project is to kind of develop an objective-based, science-based approach, and white paper that will be used by municipal stormwater permittees in selecting future projects, and also as a basis for stakeholder policy discussions that will eventually make recommendations on the future levels of effort to ecology. So, like I said earlier, the details of that project are going to be presented next session. So I'm not really going to focus on this, but I do want to just hit a few highlights just as an FYI. Basically, this project is kind of focusing on three different elements. So the first is benefit questions, where the goal is to develop answers to a series of questions related to the intended stormwater-related environmental benefits and impacts of each one of these SSC qualifying project types. The second is the application questions, which is developing answers to a series of questions related to permittees' selections of SSC qualifying project types. And then lastly, kind of that policy discussion part. And so with the current scope, it's drafting a plan and schedule for charter workshops and stakeholder discussions. That will be kind of the whole second part of the policy discussions about Ecology's SSC point system and future permit requirements, which, like I said, is kind of the second part of that process. So that's looking to be completed, the first part anyways, in June 2021. So that's mostly what I have to say about that. So that was a lot of history, a lot of progression. And so I think we have a decent amount of time to answer some questions then.
Thank you, Emma. That was very informative, and clearly there's a lot underneath the surface of that talk going on as far as the regules.
Yeah.
And so if you could clarify, there was one question that came up during the chat. Can you confirm that LOE means level of effort?
Oh, yes, I apologize. Yes, LOE is level of effort.
Okay. And that's what we assumed as an audience, but we don't want to make sure.
Of course.
I have a question for you. Being a phase 2 permittee in Spokane, we see a lot of things happen on the west side in phase 1 and phase 2 west siders that end up over here over time. Is this a program you anticipate coming down into the phase 2 realm of permits?
Yeah, so we haven't really made any decisions as far as, phase 2. On the west side, there are new stormwater planning requirements for phase 1 and phase 2. And if you want to learn more about that, I think Abby Stockwell is giving a talk tomorrow that goes into a lot more details of that. But part of that process over on the west side is basically planning for some projects in a defined basin area. And so, like I said, we haven't figured out what implementation looks like for that. But if we're asking permittees to plan those retrofit projects, it's, not out of the realm of possibilities that we would ask those projects to eventually be implemented. However, whether that is going to look like this SSC program with points and that kind of level of effort, we really haven't decided. Okay. And then as far as over on the east side, we haven't really had those conversations yet. We're really kind of in the beginning of trying to figure out the scope of what kind of changes we want to see in the next permit. And hopefully next year we'll start coming out with some ideas for preliminary comment to get more input from permittees on both sides.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have another question. Speaking to the implementation for the phase ones, what kind of successes have you seen from your phase one permittees, and what kind of feedback have you received from those that have really gotten into the point program so far?
Yeah. So one thing that I forgot to mention is these projects are being submitted to us annually, but the permittees are not required to hit that 300 point level until I think it's 2023. It's 2020. Yeah, 2022 or 2023. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting my dates mixed up a little bit. And so the point around that is, though, is we don't have a defined set of data yet to see kind of where permittees have gone this permit cycle. But, you know, everything that we did this permit cycle was based on a lot of the successes and projects that the permittees implemented last year. And so we've seen a willingness from all of our phase one permittees to be putting these projects in the ground, and a willingness to really want to prioritize these projects in the best way that's going to be most beneficial, which is really encouraging. And that's also shown through the involvement that we've had with this SSC science synthesis project. We've had a lot of involvement with those phase one and even phase two permittees, and that interest is really encouraging.
Well, for the permit, it seems to me, not being involved with it, but for the permittees that are being very proactive, this point system gives them a metric which they can actually show value.
Exactly. Which is great, right? Like, we want to be able to give credit for the things that these permittees are doing, and you know, besides the overall water quality benefit, it's just trying to also find a way to, give them credit where credit is due.
Sure. We're running up really close to being time here, but I do have one more quick question. But you have an out because we only have 3 more minutes. Are there other states that have implemented a similar program that you leveraged from, or is this cutting edge and truly a Washington State brainchild outside of the EPA?
Yeah. So since retrofitting is a requirement for phase ones, like that's written in the CFR, there is retrofit programs all across the country, right? None that take this kind of particular approach. There's other programs that take, you know, different types of approaches, such as like a certain amount of trees planted or a certain amount of impervious surface removed, and things like that. And when we were looking at trying to quantify this and how we wanted to do this, we did look at other states, and tried to, you know, see what we could glean and learn from those too.
Leverage in when you can, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel if you don't need to.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for your time and thank you for the information. Thank you for fielding the questions. And for all the participants, as you come up with questions, I'm sure Emma would be happy to entertain them, and you can reach out to her. Her information is available through the Municon documentation. And with that, I'm going to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.